Once upon a time, in a village called Omalicha, where the hills stretched tall against the sky and the streams were clear and cool, there lived Ronke, a young, pretty girl in her late teens. Ronke's father was a vegetable farmer, her mother sold the vegetables at the market, and her younger brother, Balaji, spent his days chasing after goats in the fields. Life was hard, but they managed until one day when things took a bad turn as her father fell ill. At first, it was just a fever, but it got worse. His breathing became heavy, and his skin burned like fire. They had no money for medicine, and the herbs her mother used did nothing to heal him. Ronke watched as her father's strength faded away, and every day her heart grew heavier. One evening, after fetching water from the stream, Ronke sat by the water's edge. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges. She placed the heavy water pot beside her and began to cry. Her tears fell into the stream, mixing with the flowing water. She sang a sad song, one her mother used to sing when times were hard. Her voice was soft, but the pain in it was clear. She cried and sang until it got quite dark, and the stars appeared in the sky. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and she fell asleep under the tree by the stream. When it was completely dark, something cold and smooth brushed against her skin. Startled, Ronke woke up. A dog was sitting beside her, its fur glistening in the moonlight. She screamed and jumped up, running a few steps away, her heart pounding in her chest. But then she realized she had left her water pot by the stream. It was late, and her family needed the water, so she forced herself to go back. As she reached for the pot, a soft voice stopped her. "Don't be afraid," the voice said. Ronke froze and looked around, but she saw no one. "Down here," the voice said again. Her eyes dropped to the dog, and she realized with shock that it was the dog speaking. You talk?" Ronke asked, her voice shaking. "Yes," the dog replied. "My name is Dotun. I heard you crying and wanted to help." Ronke was too shocked to move. She had never heard of a dog that could talk. "Help? How can a dog help me?" she asked, still crouching by the water. "I heard your song, and I felt your sadness," Dotun said, its voice calm and soft. "I have been lonely for a long time. I only ask for your company. If you sing for me each time you come to fetch water, I will give you something in return." Ronke stared at the dog, unsure of what to say. "What could you give me?" she finally asked. Dotun sat closer and set a small calabash beside her. "Every time you sing for me, you will find this calabash filled with money when you return home." Ronke felt her chest tighten. Money. They needed money for her father's medicine, but could she really trust a dog? She stood up quickly, shaking her head. "I don't want your money," she said, her voice trembling. She picked up her pot and hurried home. That night, when Ronke reached her house, she found her father's condition had worsened. His breathing was shallow, and he could barely open his eyes. Her mother sat by his side, looking more tired than ever. Ronke knew then that they needed money urgently, or they would lose him. The next day, with her heart heavy, Ronke returned to the stream. After fetching water, she sat under the tree again. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to sing the same sad song. Her voice floated over the water, and soon enough, she heard the rustling of leaves. Dotun emerged from the shadows. "You came back," the dog said, almost sounding pleased. "I need the money," Ronke said quietly, her eyes fixed on the ground. "For my father's medicine." Dotun nodded its head slowly. "Then take the calabash," it said. "It will be full by the time you return home." Ronke picked up the calabash and went home, her heart pounding. When she opened it, she almost screamed. The small calabash was full of cash, enough to pay for her father's medicine and more. Her hands shook as she showed her mother, explaining that she had found a job working for the queen as a maid. Her mother believed her, and with the money, they bought the medicine her father needed. His health slowly improved, and for the first time in weeks, there was hope in their home. But the visits to the stream continued. Every day after fetching water, Ronke would sit under the tree and sing for Dotun. Every evening when she returned home, the calabash would be filled with money. Her family stopped asking questions, but they wondered how she had found such a good job. One day, however, her father's health took a sudden turn for the worse. He grew sicker than ever, and the medicine they had was no longer enough. They needed more, and they needed it fast. The next evening, Ronke went to the stream, her heart heavy with worry. After she sang, Dotun emerged as usual, its eyes watching her closely. Ronke swallowed hard and said, "I need more money. My father's health is getting worse." Dotun was silent for a moment, then it spoke. "I can give you more, but for that, you must do something for me." Ronke frowned. "What do you want?" The dog moved closer, its eyes gleaming in the moonlight. "You must let me have my desires with you," it said, its voice soft but firm. Ronke's heart stopped. She had never expected this. She had thought they were friends. How could it ask this of her? She was a virgin, and the idea of having something with a dog terrified her. She shook her head, unable to speak at first. "I can't," she whispered. But then she thought of her father, lying sick at home, struggling to breathe. She had no other choice. Her father needed the money, and without it, he would die. Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. "I'll do it," she said. Dotun slinked back into the shadows, and when it returned, it gave Ronke a larger calabash. "Tomorrow night," it said, "come back, and we will seal our agreement." The next night, Ronke prepared herself. She went to the stream, her legs trembling, dread sinking into her stomach. She sat under the tree, waiting for the darkness to fall. When night came, Dotun appeared, its body lithe and sleek. Slowly, it crept toward her, and Ronke clenched her fists, biting her lip to keep from crying out. The dog have his desire, and later when it was over, Ronke gathered her clothes and ran home, tears streaming down her face. The large calabash was waiting for her, full of money, but this time, the price felt much too high. She cried all the way home, feeling ashamed and dirty. She had done something she never imagined she would do, and for what? Money? Her father's life? But the guilt weighed on her, and the tears wouldn't stop. When she got home, her mother was sitting outside peeling yams for dinner. "Ronke, are you all right?" her mother asked, her face lined with worry. "I'm fine, Mama," Ronke said, forcing a smile. She didn't want to worry her mother more than she already was. "I just had a long day." She slipped into her room and lay on her mat, curling into herself. That night, she didn't sleep. She kept thinking about what had happened at the stream, about Dotun and how she had let it take advantage of her. Her father's health was improving, but at what cost? She felt trapped, like she had sold her soul for a handful of coins. Days turned into weeks, and her father got better. He could walk again, and his strength was returning. Ronke's family was happy, but she wasn't. Every night, she went to the stream, sang for Dotun, and lay beside it. Each time it got harder to hide her pains. The money kept coming, but she didn't care anymore. She just wanted it to stop. One evening, after another desirable night with the dog, Ronke told Dotun, "I don't need your money anymore. My father is well. We have to stop." Dotun's cold eyes watched her. "If we stop, your father will become sick again," the dog said simply. Ronke's heart sank. "But he's healthy now," she protested. "He doesn't need anything more." "If you stop coming to me, he will fall ill again," Dotun repeated, its voice calm but final. Ronke felt like the ground had been ripped from under her feet. She had no choice. If she stopped, her father would suffer. She cried for hours by the stream that night, wondering what she had gotten herself into. She had thought the deal would save her family, but now it seemed like a curse. The weeks passed, and Ronke continued going to the stream every night. She sang for Dotun, and the dog lay beside her, its weight cold and heavy. Each time, it hurt, but she kept going because of her father. But one night, everything changed. Her little brother, Balaji, had noticed her sadness. He was small but clever, and he had always looked up to his big sister. That evening, he heard her crying in her room. He knocked on her door. "Sister, what's wrong?" Balaji asked, his small voice full of concern. "Nothing, Balaji," Ronke said quickly, wiping her tears. "Go to bed." but Balaji wasn't convinced. He could see the sadness in Ronke's eyes, and he knew something was wrong. So the next evening, he decided to follow her. He didn't tell anyone, not even their mother. He just watched as Ronke left the house with her water pot, and then he quietly followed her through the trees, staying out of sight. Ronke didn't notice him. She walked to the stream as usual, set down her pot, and sat under the tree. Balaji crouched behind a large rock, peeking out just enough to see what his sister was doing. Ronke started to sing, her voice soft and sad. It was the same song she always sang when she was upset, the same one their mother used to sing. Balaji watched her closely, but nothing seemed unusual. Maybe she was just sad. Maybe that was all. But then, as the sun began to set and the sky turned dark, Balaji heard Ronke speaking. "Please," Ronke said, her voice low, "take it be gentle oh. I'm tired." Balaji frowned. Who was she talking to? He peeked around the rock, his eyes wide with curiosity. That's when he saw it, a large, dark dog was stepping out from the bushes, moving towards Ronke. Balaji's heart pounded in his chest as he watched, frozen in place. Ronke didn't look scared. She sat there, her legs slightly open, and the dog settled beside her, its body winding against hers. Balaji couldn't believe what he was seeing. His sister was lying with a dog. He couldn't keep quiet any longer. He screamed, a loud, piercing scream that echoed through the trees. Ronke jumped up, startled. The dog growled and quickly disappeared into the bushes, melting into the shadows. Ronke's heart raced as she looked around, her eyes landing on Balaji, who was staring at her with wide, terrified eyes. "Balaji!" Ronke shouted, her voice shaking. "What are you doing here?" Balaji's face was pale. What were you doing?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. He was trembling, his eyes still wide with fear. Ronke felt like she was going to faint. She didn't know what to say. How could she explain this? How could she tell her little brother that she had been lying with a dog for money? "Balaji, listen to me," she said, stepping towards him, her hands shaking. "I can't explain." But Balaji didn't wait to hear the rest. He turned and ran, his small feet kicking up dust as he raced back home. Ronke stood there, frozen, tears streaming down her face. She had kept this secret for so long, but now. Ronke stood by the stream, paralyzed with fear and shame as her brother's footsteps faded into the distance. She could barely breathe. Her secret, the terrible deal she had made with Dotun, was no longer hidden. Balaji knew. What would he tell their parents? What would happen to their family now? Heart pounding, Ronke grabbed her water pot and ran home as fast as she could. When she arrived, Balaji was nowhere to be found. Her mother was sitting by their father's bedside, unaware of what had just transpired. "Ronke, is everything all right?" her mother asked, noticing her daughter's flushed face and trembling hands. Ronke opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She couldn't tell her mother the truth. Not now. Not ever. She forced a nod and rushed to her room, her mind racing. What would she do? How could she fix this? Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Ronke crept to Balaji's room. He was sitting on his mat, his small face still pale and wide-eyed with shock. He looked up at her, his expression filled with a mixture of confusion and fear. "Balaji, please listen to me," Ronke whispered, kneeling beside him. "I can't explain." Balaji didn't speak at first. He just stared at her, his eyes glistening with tears. "Why, Ronke," he finally whispered. "Why were you with that dog? What are you doing?" Ronke's heart broke at the pain in her brother's voice. She took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "I didn't want to, Balaji," she said softly. "I did it for Papa, to save him." Balaji frowned, his small brow furrowing in confusion. "What do you mean?" Ronke's voice shook as she explained everything, the deal with Dotun, the nights at the stream, the money that had saved their father. "It was the only way, Balaji. I didn't know what else to do." "Balaji. No. You don't control me anymore. Dotun growled, baring its teeth, its body rippling with anger. You dare defy me? Ronke's heart raced, but she stood her ground. I do. Dotun lunged at her, its sharp teeth snapping in the air. Ronke stumbled back, fear gripping her, but she remembered Chioma's words. She couldn't show fear. I'm not afraid of you, she said, her voice rising. Dotun growled again, its body coiling as it prepared to strike, but something strange began to happen. The air around the stream grew cold, and the ground beneath Ronke's feet started to tremble. Dotun's eyes flickered with panic as it tried to lash out, but its form began to blur, its body growing weaker. Ronke stood tall, refusing to flinch. Balaji stepped out from his hiding place, standing beside his sister. You're nothing without our fear, Ronke said, her voice strong. With one final shout of boldness, I'm not afraid of you, you can't control me anymore. Ronke screamed, and Dotun's body collapsed into the shadows, disappearing into the night. Ronke fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. It was over. The curse was broken. Balaji knelt beside her, wrapping his arms around her. We did it, Ronke. It's over. Together, they walked back home, the weight of the past weeks lifting from Ronke's shoulders. She didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, she felt free. And in the quiet of the night, the stream flowed peacefully, as if the spirit of Dotun had never existed. From that day forward, Ronke could no longer go to the stream. Her secret was out, and her family watched her closely. They prayed for her, but the bond with Dotun was not easily broken. Each night, Ronke could feel the dog calling to her, whispering in her dreams, reminding her of the deal they had made. And though her father's health improved, the king's heart grew heavier with each passing day, for she knew that the curse of Dotun still lingered. She had saved her father's life, but in doing so, she had sacrificed her soul. The village never looked at her the same again, and neither did her family. Ronke had traded something far more valuable than money, and she would live with that choice forever. The next day, Balaji insisted they go to speak with an elder in their village. The elder, a wise old woman named Chioma, had a reputation for knowing the secrets of the land and its spirits. Ronke hesitated at first, terrified of what Dotun might do if he found out, but Balaji was determined. We have to try, he said. We can't let him hurt you anymore. With a heavy heart, Ronke agreed. They arrived at Chioma's hut, tucked away at the edge of the village. The old woman sat outside, her eyes sharp and knowing as they approached. I've been expecting you, child, Chioma said, her voice low and gravelly. I heard whispers of Dotun's tricks. Ronke and Balaji exchanged a glance, startled by the elder's words. Ronke knelt before Chioma, her voice trembling. Please, Chioma, I need your help. I made a deal with Dotun, and now I don't know how to break it. Chioma nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing. Dotun is clever, and once he has a hold on you, it's not easy to escape. But there is a way. She paused, studying Ronke's face. You must be brave, child. It will not be easy. Ronke swallowed hard. I'll do anything. Chioma's expression softened slightly. Dotun thrives on fear and desperation. The more you give in to him, the more power he has over you. To break the curse, you must return to the stream one final time. But this time, you will not sing. You will refuse him. Ronke's heart pounded in her chest. What will happen if I refuse? Dotun will become angry, very angry, Chioma said. He may try to harm you. But you must stand your ground. If you can resist him, his power over you will break. But you cannot show fear, even when he threatens you. Balaji squeezed Ronke's hand tightly, his face determined. We'll do it together. That night, Ronke and Balaji returned to the stream. The moon was full, casting long shadows over the water. Ronke's heart raced as she sat under the tree, Balaji hiding behind her. She waited, her hands trembling, her throat dry. Dotun appeared, slinking out of the darkness, its eyes gleaming in the moonlight. It approached her, expecting the usual song. But Ronke did not sing. Why aren't you singing? Dotun asked, its voice low and dangerous. I'm done, Ronke said, her voice barely above a whisper, but steady. I won't sing for you anymore. Dotun's eyes flashed angrily. You made a deal, Ronke. If you stop, your father will suffer. Ronke clenched her fists, her whole body trembling.